So folks, welcome to our first episode of Data is a Team Sport. This is School of Data's series of online conversations, videos, and podcasts where we will be exploring the ever-evolving data literacy ecosystem. And just to say, I think, Lucy, there is an echo on you. Yeah. So maybe you'd either grab your headphones or...
Let me just mute myself for a second.
Yeah. So just to say, for those of you that are joining us in the Hangout, firstly, we want to say thank you for coming. Some guidelines to help you out in participating. First of all, just do make sure that you are on mute. You can do that by hovering your mouse over the microphone icon up in the top of the center of your screen. And also to say we would love to be hearing everyone's voice in the conversation, but this is a less than perfect technology for doing so. And to prevent the painful interaction of testing mics or being in noisy or lone-width environments, we'd like to invite you to use the text-based chat room for communication. You can start this by clicking the icon in the upper left-hand corner and typing hello and introducing yourself on the right-hand side of the screen, the text message box that appears there. So please do introduce yourself and say hello. If you do have any questions during the Hangout, we do want you to type it in the text message box. Caitlin is on hand and is going to be keeping track of them. And also as well, if you do have any comments, please type them there as well. Just a reminder, this Hangout is being recorded and will be made available immediately on YouTube after we are done. It also is being broadcast live right now. We will be sharing this, and also the audio is going to be turned into a podcast. So we will be sharing that, publishing notes, and all the URLs for everything that gets referenced in the School of Data blog. So we will send you more information about how to get those outputs after today. So let me just introduce myself. I am Dirk Slater. I'm from FabWriters, and along with being an active member of the School of Data community, I also provide workshops, skills building, and consultation for advocates and activists on how to build inclusive data projects to make their campaigns more effective. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Caitlin Rogers. She is the coordinator of School of Data, and as I mentioned, is going to be monitoring the chat room. Hello, Caitlin.
Hi, so hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're super excited to be hosting these conversations, and yeah, just ask any questions in the chat. I will note them down and then we will ask them to the speakers afterwards.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. As I mentioned, this is our inaugural episode, and what we are doing is looking at the ecosystem that is needed in achieving data literacy. We are also exploring how this is evolving and adapting in the wake of big data, post-fact, and data-driven confusion. Upcoming episodes are going to be exploring different elements of the data literacy ecosystem, such as investigative journalism, activism and advocacy, academia, and government. But today, for this first episode, we really wanted just to focus on data literacy practitioners who are involved in more holistic efforts. So we have two guests who are pioneers in data literacy and are going to tell us about their experience in reaching learners in online and offline environments. Rahul Bhargava is a research scientist in the civic media group at the MIT Media Lab. He's going to be telling us about creative approaches to achieving data literacy with people and how this led to the creation of databasics.io. Lucy Chambers from Tech2Human is going to tell us about the early days of School of Data, and in particular, the journey that it made from developing online curriculum to providing fellowships. After we have heard from both of them, we will then be answering your questions. So let me invite Rahul to start us off in telling us about his methods for achieving data literacy.
Sure,
Hello,
thanks.
Sure. Hello, sir.
Good morning. So I've been doing for about 10 years. I've been doing workshops with nonprofits and groups that work in the social good sector, trying to help them figure out how to use information to do the work that they do better. And now I do that here within the Media Lab at MIT as a research scientist within the Center for Civic Media, which in general tries to work on how technology helps and can impede social change.
Great. So tell us a little bit about some of the methodologies you've used in helping people understand what they need to do with data and doing things with data.
Sure. So the main thing for me is that I try to meet people where they are. And in novices, that means that like a spreadsheet training is the last thing that I want to do. I like spreadsheets, and it's like puts me to sleep just thinking about it, you know? And generally, it's like run by IT in some larger organizations, and that's like, unfortunately, people that are put in this position where they have to do training but aren't given the skills to do that well. So what do? Well, instead of that, I try to use the arts as an invitation. So when I think about what's the best way we have to bring people together to talk about something, inviting them together to build something using the arts is the best way that I can think to do it. It's the best tool for engagement that I know of.
And tell me, and so this really I'm quite curious about in terms of, you know, how do you actually get there? Like, what's your process for people to get to a point where they're doing something more arty and creative in their project?
Yeah, well, the great thing is, if you think about working with data, we generally have a process that starts with like looking at questions and audience and context, finding some data, trying to identify a story, and then producing something that tells that story. Each of the points along that line, to me, is an opportunity to do an arts-based activity. So what does that mean in practice? If I want to practice communicating a story, we can do an activity that involves starting with a small data set, and then sketching a story on a giant piece of paper with crayons, right? So you show up to a workshop with a big pad of paper and a bunch of crayons, and people are in a very different mindset. They're ready to sketch both sort of physically and symbolically. And that's exactly what we do with one of our tools in the databasic.io suite. It's called Word Counter, and it offers you pop lyrics and politician speeches to try to find a story in the sample data and then sketch it out on a big piece of paper.
And tell me, and I'm curious too, because one of the things I get into in terms of doing workshops and stuff like that, like is instruction, right? And so I'm really curious about what your instruction is to your participants. How do you get them drawing? What is it that you're telling them specifically to do?
Yeah, sure. We actually have that documented really well in the one sheet that's on the homepage of databasic.io that talks about how to run this activity. What we really try to do is say, look, our goal here is to sketch a story, because this is what professionals do. You go to any data visualization expert and they've got their little sketchbook with little notes about symbologies, how they want to lay something out on a screen or on a page. So we say, look, we're going to start off by showing you some examples of what you can do with quantitative analysis of text data. So how can you look at sort of as pop lyrics, for instance, and look at what words are being used? And that's what this tool helps you do. Then we say, all right, we're going to do that, and here are some inspirational visualizations. And we're going to do that in small groups, and there's paper and crayons for each group. And what I want you to do is look at lyrics of one or more artists, and then try to find a story. It doesn't have to be some amazing insight. It can be about like Aretha Franklin and how she talked about love. If you want to, you can compare it to Metallica and how they talk about love. And then just come up with a way to represent that visually, and don't just draw a bar chart. Do something creative. And we say stick figures are totally cool. I draw with stick figures and speech bubbles. And if you give people that space and that set of instructions and give them really just 10, 15 minutes, so not a long thing, their creativity comes out. And then you set up and you have this wonderful gallery of examples in a workshop that you can respond to as a group. Like, oh, there's a story that used abstract symbols to talk about love as a comparison between two artists. So you get to talk about things like different types of stories, whether it be like a story about one data point or comparison story, a story over time. You also get to talk about visual mappings of data to symbols or abstract representations. All that stuff comes out.
That's great, and I have to say, like that. I'm particularly curious about your approach to the gallery, because I do a similar exercise in getting people to put up or to look at data visualizations in in a gallery type environment and get them to look at them more analytically. So what do you do when you actually get people to that point where you are getting them to put things up on the wall?
So I usually we'll do a share back where we have a 1 minute summary from each group, and I really keep it strict, right? So um, just give 1 minute to talk about what you made and what it shows, and then what I do is I just go through all of those, and then I say, oh, okay, group number two, uh, do you see any other examples here that are similar in some aspect, either similar symbols or similar type of story to what you made. So I let the participants find connections, and then I try to name them together. Then I say that, oh, okay, great. So I heard you use a word to like comparison. How many comparison stories do we have in the room? So then I build the language together to talk about this. Instead of talking about like, oh, correlations and things like that, we end up with a language that the group evolved together. So they have ownership for how they talk about these stories and how we tell them visually.
Yeah, and it just like one of the things that I really love about getting people to do that kind of thing where they are making their own comparisons and also drawing their own conclusions is that is always a great way to be sort of building confidence in people and getting them to understand that, you know, they can think critically in terms of how data is displayed, and that really critical thing, which is, you know, what works and what doesn't. Because if it doesn't work for them, it's probably right. Whatever they're putting out is not going to work for other people.
Yeah, and Dirk, I think that's spot on, that word that it's building their critical literacy, right? It's building their ability to look at a story or a data set and know what questions are good to have in mind about it, and be able to sort of deconstruct it into its composable elements. That's what it builds, and that's really the underlying muscles that I try to work on, and those transfer directly to the technology, right? It's the key point for me is that I bring them to that offline space with the materials so that when they go back to the technology, that muscle is built. They're just using it on a different tool, right? They understand how they should be thinking about it, and that translates into the tool.
And I'm just curious in terms of like work that they might actually be having in terms of data, like real stuff that they are trying to do with data. Like when do you get them back to the real world?
Yeah,
Or,
so if I have a long enough period of time with folks, then I circle back. I mean, the data basic tools all allow you to upload your own data, but we've built them as an on-ramp because so many of these tools that people run into, like a lot of the participants that I run into, they'll be, you know, someone that uses Infogram or BatchGeo or one of these like websites that produces something very quickly. Um, those websites aren't really built for learners. And this is a narrative that I'm working on with my colleague, Catherine Ignazio. We do the Data Basic project together. We like to talk about how those tools are kind of informal learning spaces, but they're not built to be those. They're not built with learners in mind. They're built with users in mind. So to build for learners in mind, we do one small thing in Data Basic, and then we point people at other tools they can use. So for instance, with Word Counter, they can go and use Overview if they want to do more in-depth text analysis, you know, but that has a much steeper learning curve. It's not the right on-ramp.
so and really want to get much more into the thinking behind the databasic.io tool that you created. Like what is that specifically supposed to do for people that are trying to learn about data?
Yeah, so we've created it, Catherine and I have created it as a suite of very simple focus tools that are built around learners exercising a very specific muscle that's part of that pipeline of going from data to story to presentation of the story. So we have one of them called WTF CSV that practices asking questions of your data and yourself. Another one called Word Counter and SameDiff both get at the idea of quantitative analysis of text and sketching a story. And a new one called Connect the Dots gets at the idea that drawing a network diagram of your data can help you ask different types of questions than analyzing it as a CSV.
I have to say, I love the WTF CSV because God knows that is
Yes.
something that I have shouted
We've
many
all
times
we've all had that
at a
moment.
CSV file.
And we went back and forth on that one because like it means that it's hard to use, like it's hard to get teachers in high schools to use that tool. But we were like, that name is just like it resonates too deeply with people to not use.
and in relation to CSV files. No,
Yes.
and one of the things that I really love about this approach, and something I definitely want to integrate databasic.io into my own sort of toolkit of things that I'm using in a training, because one of the things that I have found really powerful in getting people to understand what their own data is capable of is just simply by doing the mapping. Like, I mean, one thing that's pretty easy to get people to do as sort of like a first step is to get people to put it into a map, because there's so many great tools out there that they can do that with. And it's really always interesting to me, the sort of the light bulbs that start to go off once they've gotten that step of getting it out of the CSV file or getting it beyond the spreadsheet and starting to be able to see it more graphically, right?
Yeah.
And
this is like, sorry, go ahead.
So good. No, well, I was going to say that the map isn't often the right tool, but it's that first step. And what I like about what you guys have done is you're actually giving this more of a suite of different things that they can be trying out. So they actually can get that. Oh, it's not just a map. It could be one of these other things, and you can try that out immediately with the tool.
That's exactly right. I mean, if we were to make a mapping tool, I don't know what the activity would be yet off the top of my head, but the underlying muscle we want to exercise would be to help people think about when mapping is the right way to tell a story, right? Because maps right now are so popular that stories that aren't geographic stories are attempted to be told on maps just because there's latitude and longitude. So that, I think, is the key muscle we would want to exercise, is helping people realize when a story is a geographical story that's good to show on a map and when it's not.
Well, good. And actually, I think also by doing that bit at the beginning where you've gotten people to draw out, think a little bit more about story and narrative, right? And draw something out. So you are not asking them to do the more data-driven visualization, but just actually, creating a story first and drawing that then opens up people's minds to the idea of like, okay, that the map might not be the thing. It might be comparison. It might be all the gazillion other ways that we've seen in data visualization.
Right. And for our audiences, that story focused way of talking about it really helps, for the nonprofit staff, for the journalists, for the educators. Like, talking about telling stories with your information gets us out of this intimidating thing that is like data visualization, which people see as like fancy graphics that they don't have the budget or the skills to do. So that language is really important for us, for that novice audience, and then we build it up together.
That's super cool. So want to just shift gears slightly. One thing I'm really curious, particularly with your experience and creating this tool and all that, do you sense a need for any change in your approach given what's been going on lately in terms of, given shifts, like it feels like we're sort of post big data, but also these things that have been coming up in terms of data-driven confusion and sort of the post-fact bit?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're post big data at all. Actually, I think in certain segments we are, but at the general sort of business populace is still on that bandwagon and riding it. But I think in general, in my workshops, I've always argued that the way we use data is rhetoric, right? We make arguments with it when I'm doing these kinds of things. That data isn't truth by itself. It carries bias. We should write a biography of it. It works within a context. All those things are things that come up, and that I try to emphasize to fight against this narrative of like data as truth. So I think that for me, it's just given me a great example to talk about. Be like, oh, okay, like this is one of the tools on your tool belt. You can't just expect to show someone data and have them think about it rationally. Like we're not rational creatures. We're human beings. You need to acknowledge and embrace that. And now more people are receptive to me when I say that.
Right. No, and I think the one thing too is like, the bit where we tend to lose people when we are presenting data is if they don't recognize the story, right? And it's a narrative that seems alien to them, and in particular, if it's not something that they're involved in or with. And so, for me, I think it's really critical that we are thinking about how are we including people in the narrative, the people that we are wanting them to interact with the data? Are we including them in the narrative? Are they part of the story?
Yeah, and that's this audience piece is huge. I mean, like, yes, the building, like, we work on capacity to do the data analysis and understand the mechanisms and the algorithms for that. And we work on the ability to identify an audience well and try to get some instincts for picking a presentation technique that's appropriate for the audience and the goals.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch this to Lucy, but before I do, I just, one final thing, Rahul, in terms of this concept of the ecosystem, is there a place that you see the ecosystem really lacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons we built Data Basic is because of that problem I stated earlier, that like those informal learning spaces that are tools online aren't really built for users. So one of the arguments we're trying to make, Catherine and I, is to the tool builders to say, look, if you're making tools like this that are not kitchen sink tools, but are very focused, build it so that learners have a way in. You introduce the language, you introduce the purpose, and you help figure out why. You help them learn why, not just how to do it. And we're getting some good response. We're getting in front of those people at conferences and technology gatherings, and we're talking about this learner-focused approach. And now we're seeing good response where people are asking us, hey, what would that mean in this setting? What would that mean in that setting? So I'm very excited about that, and I feel like it is a big hole that is doing a disservice to novices that are coming in.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. Actually, and just I'm going to bring Lucy here in, and actually, Lucy, just want to put you on the spot really quick. I'm wondering if you do have any questions for Rahul before we get into the story. Please.
I do. I would love to hear about whether you have any plans to further develop Data Basic.
Yeah. I mean, we learn from each workshop we do, and what we've got right now is we've got some amazing support from Stanford and their Philanthropy and Civil Society Center to target it a bit more at nonprofits. So what we're doing is we're trying to build a set of sort of not doing train of trainers, but actually build a way for people to run these activities themselves from within an organization to work on building a data culture, right? So we're starting to have some organizations try these brown bags, right? So you show up at this brown bag. It's not like an IT training. You show up at a brown bag lunch, and they show this short video of us that introduces the activity. They run the activity. You get a short video of us after prompting the share back. They do the share back. And there's one key stakeholder that does a couple of these in a row over a couple of months. And that tries to sort of build this idea, the underlying ideas behind a data culture in a way that's a bit more friendly, hopefully. But we're going to try that out this fall. So we'll see how it goes.
So stay tuned. We'll see how it goes. Was there anything else, Lucy?
I mean, I have hours worth of questions. I mean, I think the other thing.
No. Let's hear from Lucy a little bit about your approaches, and then I'm going to have a bunch of questions for you.
Okay, fine.
Good. We'll definitely have more exchange. So let me switch now. Lucy Chambers, who is somebody I have learned incredible amounts from in terms of just both how to be a trainer, but also how to get people learning about data. Lucy, you were fortunate enough to be part of the origins of School of Data, and so we want to hear about that. And in particular, I'd love you to tell folks about what it was that the initial things that School of Data was trying to accomplish.
I sure can do that. So yeah, I actually wasn't around at the beginning of School of Data. I'm kind of more of an adopted mother, adoptive mother of School of Data. I came to School of Data, I think, when it was about 6 or 8 months old. And
still in its infancy.
Not quite toddler, still crying in the middle of the night, that kind of stage. And at that point, it was devised as a very ambitious concept. I mean, School of Data still is a very, very ambitious concept, but it had a very wide audience base. I think I'm not sure whether they specifically said that it was for everybody, but there were a lot of target groups. And they were envisaging being able to provide data skills for quite a lot of different levels and quite a lot of different user bases, from, for example, scientists wanting to use open data to journalists wanting to use open data. And it was born at a time where I think the open data ecosystem realized that it had to foster data literacy as well, because otherwise the open data movement would probably grind to a halt, because you'd be releasing all of this stuff, but nobody would be using it.
And just to say, I think, because it would be good to give a time frame, like what this was, what year?
Hang on. I think this is 2012. That feels around about the right number. I'm probably going to regret that afterwards when I work out that I've lost a couple of years of my life, but I think this is 2012, late 2012. And yeah, so there's a couple of things that we learned during those early stages of School of Data. Obviously, besides having a massive audience, we also had an online focus. We were collaborating with P2PU, which is Peer-to-Peer University. They had a platform to put courses online, and we did put some courses online with them. We also tried out the MOOC format, the massive online open course format. And one of the things that we discovered very quickly was how resource intensive it is to produce content, particularly for something like a MOOC, where you're producing content which gets sent out to people on a week by week basis.
But wait, is that? I mean, was it a lot of content, too much content, because the focus was so wide? Because you were trying to be a one size fits all, or was it just?
So there are a couple of things. So obviously, our focus was very wide.
Yeah.
But in general, even if we'd had a really targeted, focus, MOOCs are just genuinely really resource intensive to produce, and online materials to check them and to produce materials which work quite well online are really resource intensive to produce. And we had 3 people. There was me, and we had two data folks, data wranglers, or data divas, I think one of our members was called. And so we worked out that we needed to change tack, primarily for a resource reason. The other discovery that we made, which made us change tack early on, was that we started testing the materials that we had produced. We were partners with Tactical Tech, who produced some fantastic materials for us in the early days, and they took some of the materials that they produced, and they tested them in an offline setting in India, I believe, and they basically worked out that there were some major issues with doing text-based tutorials for something even as simple as a spreadsheet tutorial. The most notable probably is that everybody uses a slightly different spreadsheet program. So you would have some people in Excel, you would have some people in LibreOffice, you would have some people using the Google supported versions of the spreadsheet program. And when you're writing materials for something like that, each of those is just different enough to be really annoying when you're trying to produce materials. So that was another catalyst for us thinking about, okay, is our prime value proposition really going to be in producing these materials for tutorials? And I can tell you what we did next. I feel like I've talked for a long time.
Well, no, actually you should. But I think because I think what's quite interesting about this is that you were starting to really get into those, what was the limitation of the online, And I also think that what's quite interesting is the varied, this idea of like all these different spreadsheet programs. And I think like this also, did you guys also have a sense that maybe there were other ways that people could get that kind of help?
Yeah. So I think the other way that we needed to revise our approach was that obviously the remit that we had was not only broad in terms of focus group, it was also broad in terms of level. And what we started realizing was that the very beginner level was pretty poorly catered to. But once you got up to a certain level of comfort with data skills in general, you could hopefully rely on people being able to learn and teach themselves in a different way, i.e. Googling for things. So because we were pretty well embedded within the open data world, we knew that after a certain point, once you had managed to get people comfortable enough that they could know what particular terms were, you could, like, they would be able to take themselves the next step. But they needed a bit of help at the beginning. I guess this is a similar discovery that Rahul made. They need that help, like right at the beginning of the process, to have a bit of inspiration to know what they might be able to do. That's the first part. And then to get comfortable enough that with a basic set of tools, and it's amazing what you can do with a spreadsheet, that they may then be interested and capable of going on to lead their further learning a bit more independently. And so we didn't see as much of a value proposition for us further up the food chain or value chain, if you like, and decided to focus on that very early level.
Well, and I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about that story is the I think one of the things that we those of us that are involved in trying to get people to really learn something is that we realize that it is about giving them the agency and power to do their own learning, right? And so, you might people might scoff at the idea of, oh, you just want to get them to a point where they can Google something. But what you're actually doing in the, like, getting to them to a point where they can Google something is that they can act independently and have the more critical thought of, this is what I need, right? And get that understanding. So it isn't you spoon feeding people, here's what you need for data literacy. It's understanding a spreadsheet, it's understanding a pivot table, it's then being able to run this formula and that formula, and then getting that data, right? You're saying, I mean, you're understanding, one, this is entirely contextual, and it's, people are really gonna be able to run with it further if they can have that agency and go, you know what I mean? Like they can be in control of their own learning and continue that learning, after workshops, after they've done the online course, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that was the other discovery we made. We realized that we needed to provide more support. So then the next steps that we kind of made to focus things down was we narrowed the focus group. So we basically said, okay, we have to play to our strengths. I had at that point just come off helping to being one of the co-editors of the Data Journalism Handbook. So I'd been working with journalists, and I had a vague idea of some patterns that were coming up again and again and stuff that they needed to learn. One of my other team members had an activist background, so he'd been working with activists and wanted us to focus there. So we narrowed the focus group to journalists and NGOs. And then, for the reasons, like along the lines of reasons that you've just been mentioning, that kind of support setting after workshops, we realized that a lot of we could achieve quite a lot in a single workshop, but the majority of the hard bits that the people were going to have to deal with were going to happen afterwards when they were back home on their own, working with data that was a lot more problematic than, for whatever reason, or there's no way that you can cover every problem in a in a workshop. I have tried, but you can't. I came up with some very nasty data sets for people, which was the reason that we switched School of Data over to be a kind of a more people-driven project. And what I mean by people-driven was we put an emphasis on in-person training and a community of people who could be called on to support people after a workshop. And we put a lot of emphasis on making sure that that was a supportive, friendly network of people that people actually wanted to talk to and spend time with afterwards. And we came up with a couple of our own formats, data clinics, data expeditions, which put an emphasis on allowing people to meet other people and understand what the different roles that somebody might play on a data project were. Data expeditions are that emphasize that particularly strongly. You've got everybody from the storytellers to the analysts, scouts, who are the people who go off and find the data, and helping people realize that, as the title of this discussion is, the data is a team sport, and also that they probably had skills which they could lend to them, even if they didn't realize at the beginning that they had any skills that would be useful in solving a data problem. The point of a data expedition was to kind of show that they did. So a journalist, for example, with good storytelling skills was a perfect complement to an analyst who may be able to show what a data set would show, what a data set tells, but couldn't necessarily get people excited about it.
So and again, it's this bit of like you're building people's confidence,
Yeah.
right? To get to this thing that they can move forward. They know themselves, and they can be more directive in the way that they move forward.
Yeah, exactly. So I think confidence is a key part of it. And as we kind of progressed and learned more, I kind of started to see that there were basically 3 steps to achieving the grand goal of making sure that an organization could function well with data. The first one of those was a kind of inspiration. You had to do an inspiration injection, like they had to see what was possible. There was no point in teaching them data skills if they didn't really know what they could do with it. The second one is obviously building the capacity. I actually thought that was one of the easier parts of it. And then the third point is focusing on the role of data within the organization, building the organizational resilience and getting that into their DNA, which is why I was really interested with the brown bag sessions that Roel was talking about. I think ways like that where you're bringing up data again and again, and you're showing people ways that they can interact with it in a very small way. We had quite a lot of success with journalists by focusing on skills that journalists could learn in under 30 minutes. And I think that kind of encapsulating skills like that, where you can show them progress within a very small amount of time, taking something very, very simple, but making sure that they can do something that they didn't think they could do beforehand.
And I mean, I think that's the key bit when we're talking about capacity building.
Yeah.
It's just like getting people to understand that they can do it and they can move forward. Curious a little bit in terms of the fellowship programs.
Yeah.
That then got developed. Like how did you guys get there?
Again, as I think all good decisions kind of come from realizing that you are too small and too powerless. So we had a three-person team. We were everybody on the team was distributed and actually bilingual, but we realized a couple of things. Was that people needed to be taught with a kind of a deeper appreciation of local context than we had. It was fine for us to do tutorials in Austria and the UK, like in Germany where we were based, but just people who actually understood the problems and the context and the connectivity in some cases, because there was no point in us teaching tools that relied on you being online a lot of the time sometimes. So yeah, firstly, a recognition for a need to work with local trainers. And secondly, just realizing that if we wanted this to really be successful, we needed to make ourselves redundant. And we were already a small and overstretched team, so making that step was a relatively natural step. So the solution to that, which I hope is seen as a relatively successful one, is that we launched the School of Data Fellowship Program, and we identified some really, really amazing people from around the world who already had pretty good data skills. The thing that we thought that we could help them with, and what we were aiming to give them with the fellowship program, was facilitation and training skills. So that was the focus of what we worked on them with for that, particularly the first couple of fellowship rounds. And yeah, we now have, Caitlin will be able to tell you more about this, because we it's obviously an ongoing initiative, but there have been several rounds of fellows. As far as I can tell, increasingly they've just been growing and growing, and it is now a totally amazing network of people all around the world, from I think every continent, but I may be wrong. I don't know if we've ever had one from Australia. I
think there has been a map made of and included. I mean, one of the things though that I think is really critical, because I did some work looking at with a colleague, Marielle Garcia Marquez, for School of Data. We were looking at data literacy and how to get there, and of course the fellows program was huge, in both in terms of, they were local people getting, local organizations, and they became forces in their own rights, but then also really important for the School of Data network in terms of establishing chapters globally. And that bit that you talked about in terms of, we're only 3 people, but what School of Data is been able to so grow because of the fellowship program, but then also I think for other people that were already doing data literacy type work, organizations to connect, and they're able to connect to it, contribute and make use of the curriculum that you guys were developing and all that. So, those aspects really, really worked. I want to pause for just a second. I know, I think Caitlin has a question or two that she wants to ask, and I just want to make sure she gets an opportunity to do that. So Caitlin, do you mind coming off mute and asking some questions?
Yes, of course. And I also want to know, I think Grow probably has some questions for Lucy and vice versa. So I definitely want to try to facilitate that conversation as well. One of the things that both of you mentioned that I was really interested in, if you could both kind of go into some details about, is around building a data culture within an organization. So I wanted to just hear a little bit more about your experience in trying to build data cultures within the organizations or institutions, what challenges that you faced, and how you feel like you've kind of gotten over those challenges, and tips and tricks, I guess.
Sure, I'll go first on this one. It's so one of the things we're trying to focus on now is precisely doing that, like helping mid-sized to large organizations overcome the barriers. And one of the main ones we're running into is this thing I sort of alluded to earlier, this idea that IT has ownership of the process of building a data culture. And I think that's a real organizational mistake when they make that strategy decision. I understand the logic behind it, but it's a real strategic mistake. So I often push for these organizations to do things like take my data sculpture activity, where you spend 5 minutes with one data set, just a summary of it on one page, building something out of craft materials that represents a story, right? So I say, look, what you should be doing is just set that up in your lobby on a table for a day and have people pop by, like when they're going to lunch, just grab them, have them stop, give them this one data sheet that is like, a pie chart and a histogram of something that's happening in your organization that they can relate to, and have them build something with, googly eyes, pipe cleaners, scissors, and paper, and then take it back to their desk. That's the kind of thing that you need to do at a very basic level to just shift the narrative around what it means to have a data-informed culture. You want people to be thinking that, oh, data is one of the things that I want to use to do my work better and communicate my work better. And the IT training doesn't quite get there. It builds the technical skills, but it doesn't have the context about that. And I find that those sorts of alternative angles in help you build the context.
That's great.
I totally agree with everything Rose said. I might take the question from a different angle, because I think that there's two sides on which this is problematic. There's like how to encourage people to actually use data, and then there's how to encourage people to consume it in a different way. As in to read it in a different way, obviously using and consuming it. So for example, what I mean by the latter, I think Rose dealt quite well with the first one, is I worked in public health for a while, working in a couple of countries in West Africa, and one of the interesting things that I noticed when I was doing that was that there was a huge amount of data. There's a huge amount of data being bandied around in public health, and all of these big international organizations are using that the whole time. And but there are certain visuals with which people become very comfortable, and then they are used for everything.
Yes, it's so true.
Yeah, so one of the visuals which was very common in that setting was kind of like a stacked bar graph, or like red, yellow, green bars, which is bad for other reasons that we won't get into. But yeah, so like it was what I saw in settings like that was that basically this chart was used for everything, and they were like printed off and they were put on the walls of all of these buildings, and there was nothing striking about any of these visuals. There was nothing to tell you what was different about this visual this month or the visual last month. And so one of the things that we spent time with them doing was experimenting on getting them to talk through, okay, if somebody presents you with a chart that looks like this, tell me what it tells you. So getting them to talk through what a chart tells them. And actually, because we didn't have any success with the route, please let us try and help you make this visual more exciting. That just didn't work. They were just too institutionally comfortable with this way of visualizing things. But they kind of had to come to the conclusion themselves that actually they couldn't tell what the action that they would need to take was from this visual. So having a conversation with them, asking very simple questions like, what does this tell you? And what would you do if you saw this? Was the way that we managed to like start talking to them about, okay, maybe there's a different way that we need to present this information if you're trying to very urgently tell people that they need to be acting on this particular point.
I would just respond to that, Lucy. I think you're spot on with that. I think one of the things to point out is for more like stories of how people have done that, we can't talk about this without mentioning Beth Kanter's second book, right? The Measuring the Network Nonprofit, I think, because it's a little bit about like KPIs and stuff, but the stories in there about real organizations are super valuable for talking with organizations about what it means and what the impacts can be.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when I'm trying to sort of get started and talk about when an organization says, hey, we want to build a data culture, and I'm having that, oh, what does that mean to you conversation, I try to pull stories from her book because they're so concrete and get people into like out of this realm of like, oh, we want to be making dashboards and like network diagrams.
No.
Yeah, and into the realm of like, oh,
yeah.
we actually want to, be able to talk about how effective our work is, things like that. It helps make that shift. I find the examples in her book help make that shift really well.
Exactly, and I think the final thing that I would build on Rahul's point even further is that, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about data-driven cultures, jump to conclusions like dashboards. Like, I can rant about why dashboards are not the solution to everything for a long time, but I think that these small approaches with things that people can do on their own without building a piece of software that shows everybody what's going on at the organization are a much more likely way of getting people to really embrace and actually use stuff.
I knew somebody was going to bring up the D word sooner or later.
We got it in.
Especially with talking about organizational culture. Caitlin, we are coming to the wrap up. Just want to make sure, is there anything else that should be answered at this point? Because I have two more questions I want to ask these folks before we let them go.
No. Go with those two questions.
Great. So I got to give you guys an opportunity to plug stuff. So, are there things that you would like to plug, things that you are working on that people should know about?
Rahul, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I already kind of did mine. So databasic.io is our playground for trying out these ideas. It's not so much of a product as a playground. We're tweaking it and learning and changing things all the time. So if people are looking for things they can use, do that. In addition, if any of the people listening are thinking about how to do that shift into a culture, drop me a line, because we are trying out these sort of brown bag video facilitation thing, and we're trying to build a cohort of groups that want to do it, small and big. Over the fall. So the commitment is like, you're committing to running 3 of these brown bags within your organization and doing a Google Hangout afterwards to talk about each one. And you get like a certification and stuff like that. But we're just trying to build a cohort to try this stuff out so we can iterate. So if anybody's interested in that, do connect with me through any of these means, and we can try to talk about whether it's a good fit or not. So that's my plug and my ask to folks.
Great, and we'll be giving everyone information about how they can plug in with that. Lucy,
I have 2 plugs if I'm allowed to.
you are.
So I write relatively openly about stuff that I learn from the point of view of stuff that I used to think was true and then discovered was not, at tech2human.com. So if you want to follow my journey of discovery all the way through my life, that's probably the best place to do that. Also, I just started working on a project to get all of the data on politicians, specifically legislators in every country across the world, into Wikidata, which is very, very ambitious, but we think we can do it. And our project has a Twitter handle if you want to stay up to date and possibly encourage people from your country to contribute data. Its Twitter handle is everypolitbot, and the project is called everypolitician.org. So that's going to be keeping me busy for the next couple of months.
and I'm sure you're going to be writing about that in Tech2Human as well.
I will.
And just to say also, I'm a huge fan of Tech2Human. I use it all the time. Lucy has lots of great stuff on there, and also sign up for her newsletter, which is awesome as well.
Oh.
Totally agree.
One final thing I just got to know, and we are coming up on the hour, but what are there any data literacy projects out there that are inspiring to you that you are watching right now? And let's get Rahul. You
Or to build on that, because I love the recommendation of Beth Cantor's book, and we will drop that into the blog post about this episode. But are there specific books or articles or things like that that have gotten you to think critically and about data literacy and have really kind of helped shape your thinking around this subject?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. So one of the things I'm hugely inspired by right now, actually coming out of the building that I'm in, is Mako Hill and Saminda Dasgupta are writing about children's thinking about critical data literacies. And they're doing it within the Scratch project. And the experiments that they're running and writing about are just super fascinating. And they're exposing, I think, for the sort of really like in an authentic, sort of grounded way, how children are thinking about one aspect of these critical data literacies in situ, in a place where their data is being exposed, and they're thinking about what that means and what the impacts are. So I would check out their writing. We can share a link to it, but it's super great. And I'm doing more work with youth lately, so I'm very interested in the work that they're doing on that angle.
And I do have your link. I am going to just pop it into the text box for those that are there, and we of course will be sharing that later. Lucy.
Some great resources. Two for everything. One is the Data Stories podcast, which has been going on for quite a long time. Incredibly engaging without even having anything to look at. And they have covered a couple of really, really interesting topics recently, from like how do you rate a visual, like how do you work out whether a data visualization is good, to like how to deal with Trumpery and and post-fact stuff. The other thing that I actually learnt from that podcast that I would give a special shout out is a project called Makeover Monday. So I think it's makeovermonday.co.uk that can confirm that and put the link in the notes from this. But Makeover Monday is a project where every week a data set comes out in its original form, and a community of people are encouraged to play with it and reshape it and present the data in a different way. And so it's really, really interesting to see how different, like what different stories you can tell with exactly the same data set, and when different people get their hands on it. So for anybody teaching data viz, I think there's some really good data sets there, but also some really interesting things that they've done with them.
Yeah, and I've also Makeover Monday, and thanks, Lucy actually turned me on to it. But I've been going over that and looking at the different ways that they're showing data, and it's a great learning tool, I think, as well. So we need to wrap up. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I think really thinking through in terms of this concept of how do we get learners to learn. And it isn't just about workshops, it gets beyond that. But I think the big thing is how are we providing opportunities for people to have agency over their own learning, and also building confidence that they can move forward and figure out for themselves on what they need. So I really appreciate both of you telling us those stories. Rahul and Lucy, thank you so much. Also want to say thank you to Caitlin. I do want to remind everyone, we are going to be sharing notes from today's conversations. We're going to get that out to you via email. It will be on the School of Data blog. This will be a video stream on YouTube. You can find it there. Plus, we are going to be making a podcast out of this audio, and we will let you know how to get that. Our next episode for Data is a Team Sport will take place on June 8th at 3 p.m. UK, and we're going to be examining the role of data-driven journalism with Eva Constanteris and Natalia Mazot. So please stay tuned to the School of Data website for more information on that. And a big thanks to the listeners and our participants. We are so grateful that you were here and could listen in and be a part of this conversation. We hope this has benefited and informed your own data literacy efforts. So with that, thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.